Nice to meet you in our journal. Please, Gary, let you introduce yourself in few words, please.
My name's Gerry Murphy. I live in Australia. I'm a boxing coach. I've been a boxing coach for over excess of 20 years. I've been in boxing since 1973, from when I was 15 years old, I suppose. And currently, I've probably got about 30 amateur fighters, and I've got 4 professional.
Thank you. My first question. How did you start your boxing?
I had much love for Muhammad Ali. I really loved his style, and I personally copied his style. I don't necessarily train to teach his style, but I liked his style, and I felt comfortable using his style, which back then in the 70s liked to do. So that's probably the main reason, but also a friend of mine was boxing at the time, and he was a professional, and he invited me down to a gym in Melbourne called Waterson's Gym, and that's where I started my boxing career there.
My next question. In the recent interview, Steve Lott, head of Boxing Hall of Fame in Las Vegas, said that today boxing is a show. How would you describe the state of boxing?
Look, there's sort of like two views. You got the purists, like say yourself and myself, who love the purity of boxing and the skills and whatever. But now, with the advent of the internet, there's a lot of people that are sort of getting themselves involved in boxing that aren't really boxers or things like that. So what it's doing is it's creating, I suppose, these shows on the side, like Paul, for instance, digging these shows on the side with people that really don't know what they're doing. And as much as it's consternation to us, it's actually bringing a lot of publicity to boxing. So a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't have looked at boxing, because of these people, they're actually looking at boxing. So in essence, I think long term, it's going to work out for the better anyway. But a lot of people like myself and purists, I suppose, look a little bit harshly on it. And so we should, because it's not real boxing. But having said that, as long as people recognise that it is just show, it's not the real stuff, it's not the real boxing, right? And the young ones that are watching it learn that, then it's not a bad thing.
Gary, can we compare the class of boxers of 60s, 70s, and maybe 80s years and today?
Well, the way you were taught back then was a lot different. As I was saying earlier on when we spoke, the Frazier Ali fight, the Thriller in Manila, it was 50 degrees in a great big shed full of thousands and thousands of people. So you imagine the heat in there. Every round, they're losing more water. In those days, trainers didn't believe that you don't have water in between rounds, right? Because it might affect your stomach, or, if you get a stomach shot or something like that. So they never drank water, and you're weak if you've done it in training, right? So they got to the 14th round, they're both sitting there, both completely dehydrated. I think both of them got badly damaged in the brain then, because you can imagine all the water, the brain holds a hell of a lot of water, and that's all been dehydrated, and they're pounding each other. Neither of those fighters could get out of their seat at the end of 14 rounds. They both pushed themselves to the point of almost death. Mm-hmm. Right? That was the mentality back then. Don't have water. There was a lot of stuff that was unscientific, whereas now everything's a little bit more scientific. You watch Canelo, a lot of the good fighters, Mayweather, their diet, everything's perfect. Everything's scientifically studied, and so they're a lot more viable as fighters. Like their body is a lot more prepared to do that hard work. Mm-hmm. And also because of the equipment they wear nowadays. Back in the 70s, a fighter was finished by the time they were 30 because they were basically punch drunk. Whereas now, because they've got these winning hats and the good headgear that they use, you don't see many fighters get to 29, 30 now and they're brain damaged. Some of them are still going through to 39, and they're realising now that fighters are peaking in their mid-30s. So everything's changed in that way.
What are the main criteria you consider when selecting young candidates for professional boxing?
Well, first and foremost, when I choose, I've got to see a commitment in their training. If I don't see a person that's got commitment in their training, I shouldn't need to get a boy and push him to train hard. He should be able to do that himself, because in the ring, he's got to do that himself. He has to do that himself in the ring. I'm not in the ring with him, so he has to know how to push himself. And if he can't do that, he shouldn't be a professional fighter.
By the way, how many professional boxers you prepared?
At the moment, I've got about 4. I just sent a guy called Tay Singh to America. He's at Buddy McGirt's gym. He lost 4 fights. He's fought all his professional fights here in Australia. And unfortunately, he's Indian born, right? And unfortunately for him, he was always in the B side and not the A side. So every fight that he lost, and anyone in Australia will tell you, every fight that he's lost, he actually won. And there was a couple of, or draws that he should have won easily, but didn't get. Anyway, I sent him over to Buddy McGirt. I had a good talk with Buddy McGirt. And he's been over there and he's been sparring Callum Smith, people like that. And he's only a middleweight, this Tay Singh. And he's been sparring, lots of Kazakhstan fighters over there and whatever. And Buddy said they call him the tank. He said, I've never seen him pressure on like this Taze does. He's got such good pressure, and that's the way we trained him. And anyway, Buddy wants to take him on. We've got to organise a 3-year contract with a promotional company over there. And it looks like his career is actually going to take off. And it looks like he'll actually be fighting on the A sides. I lost him. I had to send him over there because in Australia, he was just not getting that chance. No one here would whenever he was put on shows, it was always to build someone else, another fighter up rather than him. So he's a very, very good fighter. I've got another fighter called Campbell Somerville, who was, as an amateur, he went to the world titles, he went to games, fought some of the best in the world and kept, held his own with them very well. He's very, very popular in Australia. He's 6'4" and he's super welterweight. So you can imagine how tall he is, 6'4", super welterweight. And he got injured in both his hips, needed an operation. It was a congenital problem. So he had to get up. He's been held back over the last couple of years. And I've got another boy from Italy that trains here. His name's Karim Matala. He's a cruiserweight. He's an absolute talent. So one day, I'm hoping to, try and get his record up and send him over to Buddy McGirt's maybe.
Do you adhere to philosophy in boxing? If so, which one? Whose philosophy are you using to teach your boxers?
I always say to the fighters, you can't swim and not get wet. All right, you can't jump in the pool and expect not to get wet. You're going to get hit in there. All right, but most of my fighters have got very good defence. But nevertheless, doesn't matter what good defence, you're still going to get hit now and then.
How you could describe the philosophy of your style?
High pressure. I train my fighters to be very, very high pressure. So I teach them to fight long, but like Campbell Summer, for instance, he's 6'4" and he's a super welterweight, but he loves to fight almost on the chest. And it draws a lot of fighters in. They think, get in, he's tall, go for his body, but he loves it. And he tears them apart. Because I've taught him we've got a very little ring, and they learn to fight in close all the time. And then we've got another place where we go to the bigger ring, and then we learn to fight out long as well. But I like the pressure. If you ever watch Tay Singh, you get the opportunity to watch Tay Singh. You'll hear his name soon now that he's fighting in America. He's a very, very good fighter. Buddy McGirt really rates him highly. So if you watch his style, and you've got to remember, Buddy trained Arturo Gatti. So he knows what pressure fighters are, and he says he's the best pressure fighter he's ever seen. Right? And that's the way we train here. We train to put pressure on an opponent for the whole bout. We don't give them a break.
Who is your favorite coach, boxing mentor? I mean, our initiators.
I would have to say Amature. Yeah,
Really?
Amature. Yeah. Not necessarily style, but just the way he approached boxing more than anything else. I like what he is. Buddy McGirt, I think he's a very, very good coach. I feel grateful that he's taken taste, and I've handed him over to him, and I think he's a great coach. He's one of the best coaches in the world. So yeah, Buddy McGirt currently, but if you overall, I would say Amature. And he was very, very good at communicating with his fighters and getting the best out of his fighters and making them believe in themselves. And that's part of being a good coach, is getting that fighter to believe in themselves. Unfortunately, sometimes they get a big head. You get them to believe in themselves too much. But unfortunately, that happens, and then they get away with themselves. But he managed to keep a cap on that.
Could you share your plans on the future?
With myself, well, I do train a lot of amateurs. I personally have become a little bit, I suppose, not upset with amateur boxing, but I just find that there seems to be corruption on all levels, not just the highest level, but even at the local, state levels and all that sort of stuff. You get things like state coaches that are put in positions that shouldn't be. They've never developed good fighters themselves. I had a situation where I had fighters go off to national competitions and whatever, and then they try and steal your fighters off you because to try and give themselves extra credibility, they'll try and steal your fighters. And I had one situation like that, and then at the state level, I was told that I could no longer train my fighters, and at one stage I had half the Australian team, but I wasn't allowed to corner my own fighters, you know what I mean? Because of the pettiness and the silliness. So with amateur fighting, I used to always sell a dream to fighters about going to Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, world titles and all that sort of stuff. But I'm no longer going to sell that dream to them, because I just think, get the amateur, breeding into them and then turn them professional. Because I just think until AIBA and until the boxing community at amateur boxing community at state levels and Australian levels or country levels get rid of that toxicity that's there, it's just not a comfortable place to work in, and it's not a good environment for your boxing. Because one day you can go and have a fight, clearly win a fight, and you don't win the fight. And so you lose fighters. I've had had 2 or 3 fights that have been ripped off, and it could have been champions, but that's what I don't like this, because these people aren't honest. Here I am training my heart out every day to win fights. And this is at a local level, not at an international level, just at a local level. And then they get ripped off for whatever reason, like who knows whatever the reason is, But most of the time, I think it's just incompetence. I don't think it's corruption. I just think that they're incompetent. And so I'll be very disenfranchised with the amateur boxing scene. So that doesn't play a big part in my future anymore, and my fighters' future. There's still a few that want to are in that area where they could possibly go to the Olympic Games or go to the world title. So I'll stick with them to do that. But I don't like to be involved with that anymore.
Gerry, please describe your system of training of women. What does it consist of? How does it differ from training of a man?
Well, obviously, the first thing you've got to remember about women is that they're not as strong. They haven't got the muscle that men have got, right? So to a certain degree, you've got to work more on skill rather than, the power. So power is, obviously necessary in boxing, but to me, when I'm training women, I don't emphasise the power. I emphasise speed and technique. So technique for the female. And I go at great lengths to teach them for them, make sure they've got really good, nice, tight defences. And their fitness is A1. The thing I find about women is that most women train harder than men if they're committed. They're absolutely amazing the way they train. I've got absolute respect for women boxers. And it's funny because when women first started boxing, it was a bit of a laugh to everyone. Oh, boxing, and I was the same. I sort of laughed with women boxing. But now I've seen a lot of those women develop their skills and whatever, and I'm impressed with a lot of them, a hell of a lot of them. Clarissa Shields, for instance. Wow, what a good fighter. So, they're, a lot of respect from me to.
Do you use some other elements from other martial arts?
Yeah, I use, I do a lot of parrying in my training, and I know that's to do with the martial arts and all that sort of thing. And I also I teach to use leverage to unbalance a fighter. So let's say they throw their left, their right out, for instance. I teach a fighter to come over and above the elbow and push them off their balance with their parry, and then they can get a good shot into the body or whatever. So I do incorporate a little bit of martial arts. I do study a lot of martial arts, and so I do incorporate that into my training as well.
Maybe you would like anything add?
Look, no, it's just not. Obviously, it's nice to meet you. It's as I said, you've made the offer that I can talk to the editor and maybe add to your magazine, and I'd be quite willing to do that. I'm obviously passionate about boxing, and obviously you are too. That's why you're there as well. And I think, well, good. Let's have a good relationship.
Thank you very much for your time and for your answers. We'll be in touch. Have a good day. Bye bye.